Catholic Connection is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
Well, this is quite the honor, a very big time for us here in the Archdiocese of Detroit. Of course, we love our Archbishop Alan Vigneron, but we knew that he was going to be stepping down because he was at retirement age, and 2 years ago did submit his resignation as is required to the bishop. And then we just learned, the Pope, just learning this week that we have a new Archbishop-elect, Bishop Edward Weisenburger, who's 64 years old and currently the Bishop of Tucson, Arizona, soon to be, though, in just a matter of weeks, the next Archbishop of Detroit. Your Excellency, it's nice to meet you. So glad. Well, I met you before, but it's nice to talk to you again on the phone.
It is. I hope we talk more than once every 10 or 12 years, though.
You know, you have quite the good memory, because I thought I had met you before, but then you recalled that I was attending a life event, and it was right before a pro-life event in your diocese and in Kansas.
It was.
And it was right before Deacon Dominic was ordained. So thank you for the prayers. It's been going great. He's a deacon almost 13 years now.
Wonderful.
But let's talk about your situation. It always has to be, even though you've moved around quite a bit, as a lot of church leaders do, it still has to be somewhat surprising when you get that call, right?
It was very surprising for me because, as you mentioned earlier, I'm 64. Tucson was the second diocese I was assigned to, and so I really never envisioned a third. So yes, it was quite the surprise when the nuncio called. I was fairly tongue-tied at first, but after I got over it, and he chuckled, and we moved forward. And he said, "There's a real grace in saying yes to the Holy Father." And I already knew that. So I breathed in and I breathed out, and I've been putting one foot in front of the other ever since.
So I've noticed that you've gotten some of the tour. You've been to the seminary. Of course, you've spent time with a good friend of mine, Father Stephen Burr, and then I know that you're familiar with St. Anne's Basilica, which is another great place. And, of course, we have the Blessed Sacrament Cathedral and so many amazing places in the Archdiocese of Detroit. It's a lot to take in. So how do you start when you take over a diocese, or in this case an archdiocese that serves close to a million Catholics? Where does one begin as the new leader?
One really begins with having a great staff around you. People who really know the place, know the people, and can come up with that kind of plan that you need. And we're even beginning to work on that now. But it's important for me to get out and meet people and engage with people. And so they'll be seeing me pretty quick after I've been installed around the diocese in various places. We joke sometimes. People don't really like to hear this, but the truth is we bishops always say it takes about 5 years.
Wow.
No one wants to hear that, I know. But they always say, to be honest, to be truthful, it takes about 5 years. And I was 5 years in Salina, and I felt like, I know the people, the places, I know where we're going, and I got moved. And then I was 7 years in Tucson, but with 2 years of pandemic, just about. I really felt like we knew where we were going, but you know, every time I have said yes, there's been blessings for me. And when I look back at Salina, Bishop Vinke succeeded me, and he's just done marvelous things with people there. And I know that Tucson will continue to be the great, vibrant church that it is. And even if it doesn't take me 5 years, because I think I'll have a great staff around me, even if it takes a year or two or whatever, the grace will unfold the way God wants the grace to unfold. And that's really the key.
Yeah. So obviously you have your installation Mass coming up in March, the middle of March, and that's going to be a beautiful event. What kind of message, what's on your heart to share with the Catholics in the Archdiocese of Detroit right now, Your Excellency?
I think evangelization has got to be key to all of our efforts. I think we have to return to that first early centuries of the church, where our example, our witness to Jesus Christ was so powerful that it overwhelmed the culture. And that always moves me deeply to think about that, what it took, because they were really struggling to survive as Christians. They were being persecuted, and yet their witness just overwhelmed that culture. And I think we need to take time building upon the wonderful programming that we already have in place in this archdiocese, but also that wonderful programming at our seminary that really focuses on the new evangelization. I think we build upon that, and we keep up those evangelization practices, and we're going to see those numbers go up. So I'm excited about that. But again, it means more than being a comfortable Catholic. It means being a committed Catholic, which sometimes means going outside of our comfort zones and really witnessing in unique ways.
That is a great point, and I know that you're familiar with Unleash the Gospel, which was an incredible letter that our Archbishop, current Archbishop Alan Vigneron, wrote several years ago, and has just really been picked up across the country. Many people are applying it to their seminaries, and many people are doing various programs at the parish level. And it continues to really, I think, hit home. There was a story that I read this week just about recent numbers in terms of we're finally getting back to pre-COVID levels in terms of mass attendance, but still, that means at the end of the day, still only a quarter of Catholics, people who call themselves Catholics or raised Catholic, are attending weekly Mass. So this ties in directly, Your Excellency, with evangelization, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. We really want to welcome those people back. And, I like to say, this is kind of a broad statement, but I think it applies to what you're talking about here, and it's simply that at the end of the day, no one can really teach the faith to anyone. You can learn important things about the faith, and there's certainly a role, and a critical role for catechesis. But nobody can, at the end of the day, teach the faith at someone. You catch the faith the same way you catch a virus. It's by
That's a
being
great
around
analogy.
people who have it. And so when you're rubbing shoulders, and so I have found I've had the most successes in parish life and otherwise when we look at how do we really reestablish a sense of community again, because our whole culture has lost community. It's not just the Catholic Church that's lost members. Our culture is becoming one more and more where people work from home. They don't interact anymore with one another. They don't interact with coworkers. They don't interact with family. We've got more and more kids not being involved in a school community. I have nothing against homeschooling. I just mean you got to create some kind of community in life if you're not going to have the more traditional methods. And to try to be Catholic without a community just doesn't work. I like to say Jesus called everyone into a personal relationship. He called no one into a private relationship.
Yeah, that's
Jesus
a great point. That is a great point.
Calls to community, always. And when we're baptized into the body of Christ, a community. Again, I think there's that as we ground better and better our parish communities, we'll see that people are going to want to be a part of that. And that's part of that witness that we saw in the early church that, again, as I love to point out, overwhelmed a pagan culture. It can overwhelm a pagan culture again.
I believe so. We're talking with the Archbishop-elect of the Archdiocese of Detroit, Bishop Edward J. Weisenburger. Your Excellency, what impressed you most? I know you've already noticed that you have a great staff downtown. We have a beautiful seminary. We have a lot of good communications already underway in terms of the way we get the message out there. What else has impressed you so far? And you haven't been here that long, but what are you seeing in the Archdiocese of Detroit?
Well, I'm laughing. They're all kind of laughing with me, too. I said I left 80-degree weather to come here, so it was not a warm welcome.
Well, not literally a warm welcome, but figuratively.
Right, that's my point. But from the heart, it's been an incredibly warm welcome everywhere I've gone. And it really began with Archbishop Vigneron. I walked into the door of the residence yesterday, and I received this incredible greeting from him. And he's been calling me on the phone almost daily, just checking in with me to make sure I'm not going to change my mind. No, you don't change your mind. I wouldn't even think that. He's been. I'm joking with you, of course. He's been just so warm and welcoming, and the priests that have been helping me and the staff here, everybody's just been so gracious and kind. So, I really transparent. I admit I have been. It shook me a little bit thinking this requires quite a skill set to this job, and I'm not sure I see that, but I am committed to always saying yes. And what I have found in the last 24 hours is I've got tremendously talented people around me who are really committed to the mission. These are people who can move the world. And these are people who, if I have any success, it's only going to be because it's interacting and working with an incredible group of people.
Now, I know it's early yet. You haven't even really officially been installed, which doesn't happen until next month. But I'm sure you'll be making the rounds. I mean, this is quite a large archdiocese, as you sure know. I don't know how many miles. I forget the number, but it's pretty big. Goes all the way down, actually, south to almost to the border. Yeah.
I had 42,000 square miles in Tucson. I have 4,000 here.
Oh, so it's not that bad then. This is a piece of cake for you then, right?
No, because I had a lot less people, less parishes in Tucson. It's just it was more spread out. So it'll be less driving on the one hand, but no, the intensity of the population, I'm kind of looking forward to it. I think it'll be great.
Well, we're excited to have you. Thank you for taking time out of this very busy week, because I know that there's a million things that you have to do, but we want to wish you a warm welcome, warm figuratively. Hopefully the temperatures will go up in a few weeks, we hope. And also, please know that you are welcome anytime on our Catholic airwaves. I think that goes without saying. We look forward to working with you, Archbishop. Thank you so much.
That's great. And I'll try to bring some of that Tucson weather with me when I come back.
Please. I beg of you, Your Excellency.
All right. All right. Good to talk to you again, and hello to the deacon.
God bless you, Archbishop. We'll talk soon.
Father Benedict Groeschel.
I often go back to my childhood. In church, we loved to be reverent to Christ present in the Eucharist, to Christ on the cross. But I was also impressed by the reverence of my friends in the Salvation Army. They had a little band, and I used to walk past the band on Sunday morning on my way to church. And I was just a child, but I said, you know, they're trying to pray to God. They're showing reverence to God. All this was reverence. Now what do I see? I hear one irreverence after another. And week after week, month after month, the media churns out things that make fun of religion in general and make fun of Christianity in particular, and particularly make fun of the Catholic Church. No class. Absolutely no class.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at avemaria.com. That's avemaria.com.
Hello, Steve Ray here. We're going to Normandy, France in November to celebrate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. We'll also be in Paris for the opening of the resurrected Notre Dame Cathedral. Join us on a pilgrimage of discovery through the saints and shrines of France. Catherine Labourier and the Miraculous Medal, St. Therese of Lisieux, the incorrupt body of Vincent de Paul, a dinner cruise through Paris on the Seine River, and so much more.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at avemariaradio.net.
He was a pope, a saint, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
Pope St. Gregory I the Great is one of only 4 popes honored as the Great. Among his many achievements was sending missionaries across Northern Europe, especially St. Augustine of Canterbury, who brought Christ to the people of England. In a pun, Pope Gregory called the English people angels. He died in 604.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
People ask how they can care for older family members who can't fully care for themselves. One answer is Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care. Visiting Angels assists adults nationwide with 600 locations to continue living at home and not have to move into a nursing home. Their caregivers provide assistance in hygiene, meals, and light housework. Services are provided up to 24 hours per day, and you can select your caregiver before service begins. More information, including franchise opportunities, is on the web at visitingangels.com.
You're listening to the best of Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo.
Catholic Connection on a Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, EWTN.com. All right, so I'm so excited and so grateful to John Bursch. He's a Michigander, and he was on with me in the first hour, the Michigan hour of Catholic Connection, and it flew by, and I said, can you please stay? I just threw the whole rundown out for that second segment of the show because I had to have him back on. And my producer, Andrew, just kind of rolls with that. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to switch this around because that's what I do, having been in live media for decades since DIRT. And knowing the resource that we have in John Bursch, who's the author of Loving God's Children, The Church and Gender Ideology, book that came out from Sophia Press not too long ago. But also, and there's so much to talk about with John, he is the Vice President of Appellate Advocacy for Alliance Defending Freedom, the largest public interest law firm in the world, defending, thanks be to God, religious liberty, free speech, parental rights, marriage and family, and the right to life. He has argued not one, not two, not three, not four, but 12 cases in the Supreme Court, including cases defending church teaching on marriage and sexuality. And, of course, he speaks frequently across the country. And there's a lot more to his resume. But, John, let's get to it. We were talking in the first hour of Catholic Connection this morning about this executive order from the 47th President, Donald J. Trump. And I want to read the title because the title alone we could talk about, but it gives you an indication of what's happening with this issue that has been suffocating and damaging so many people and entities. Defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth to the federal government. So first of all, your reaction based on all the wisdom you put in this beautiful book, Loving God's Children, and thanks for joining us.
This executive order was sorely needed, and it's a total home run from the incoming administration to a society that's totally embraced gender ideology when it comes to government officials and large corporations. You know, this is like a drink after you've been crawling across the desert for 4 years. The Biden administration has used its power to try to stick gender ideology into every aspect of society. That includes our public schools with their Title IX regs, where they required that boys who identify as girls be included in girls' bathrooms and locker rooms and showers, and strongly suggested that sports teams should be included there as well. That has insisted that boys identifying as girls have to be allowed into women's shelters. Women who have been battered and sexually abused have insisted that men who identify as women need to be in women's prisons, which has increased the number of sexual assaults and pregnancies in women's prisons. No surprise there. They've looked for every nook and cranny in federal law that uses the word sex and redefined it to mean gender ideology. And so this momentous order represents a 180-degree turn back to reality and common sense. And as he promised, President Trump acted on his very first day to confront a toxic ideology that has wreaked havoc on our health, safety, opportunities, and freedom.
Let me ask you and repeat some of the questions I posed to you earlier for our listeners here in the second hour of the program. What are we looking at in terms of pushback from those who have really been shoving this in our faces and down our throats? I'm sure there are going to be lawsuits because there's a ton of money, not just agenda, but money associated with this industry, this transgender industry. And it is in this industry, much like abortion.
Yeah, it's absolutely an industry. And in fact, one of Planned Parenthood's biggest new revenue streams is providing cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers to unsuspecting kids who think that they're the opposite sex. So it's rampant. And kind of ironic, too, that the money is driving so much of this equation because the psychologist who started the whole modern gender movement, his name was John Money. And he did some terrible experiments that he sexually abused kids back in the 1950s to, quote, prove, unquote, his theories. And so today, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars for surgeries. You're talking about a lifetime of cross-sex hormones for people who try to permanently transition. There's huge money in this for pharmacies and for surgeons. And I have no doubt that they're going to be pushing back against the executive order and all the regulations and statutes there are to come to try to preserve their bottom line.
How long are executive orders? I mean, legally.
The executive order doesn't have a whole lot of legal force on its own. What it can do is it can order agencies how they approach a problem. And so the most significant legal effect of this order is that it rescinds more than a dozen Biden administration orders and that commanded agencies to interpret sex as gender ideology in a variety of federal statutes. So the way to really have long-lasting change is for those agencies to then develop regulations which go through a lengthy notice and comment period, things like Title IX regulations that will protect women in sports, or to go even farther with the new Congress and pass laws that ensconce those things permanently in our federal statutes. Those are going to be the most long-lasting things. But simply having an executive order which redirects the policy of the entire federal government is a huge first start. And the fact that President Trump signed this on the very first day to confront this toxic ideology is a huge victory for women and children.
It is just about 21 minutes past the hour, having a very important conversation this morning with John Bursch, author of Loving God's Children, the Church and Gender Ideology from Sophia Institute Press. He is also the VP of Appellate Advocacy for Alliance Defending Freedom, the largest public interest law firm in the world, defending religious liberty, free speech, parental rights, marriage, and family. So, John, in terms of the challenges, my hope, we were talking about this again in the first hour of Catholic Connection today, my hope is that this will open the door finally for the truth about this issue to get out there, because think of the thousands upon thousands, and you know this because you address this in your book and you've worked with people involved in these types of cases, people who were greatly harmed, whether it be women in sports, young women in sports, or these women or young children that are quote-unquote transitioning thinking that was the answer. There's so many stories to be told about the damages that's done that have been suppressed by a legacy media that just takes their talking points from the left and runs with them. Do you think this is an opportunity, in addition to this very clear executive order, to really help people understand what's going on here in terms of evangelization?
Well, I certainly hope so, because evangelization is the name of the game. And your listeners need to understand that kids who are experiencing real gender dysphoria, we're talking about the mental health diagnosis now, not kids who are just doing this because they think it'll make them popular. And, there are social trends where that happens. But for kids who really have dysphoria, they have this intense discomfort in their body. And the number of kids who have that mental health condition is very small, just a microscopic of 1%, less than 1%. But for them, this is a real problem, and it causes intense mental health problems. And so we need to accompany them. Accompany means to walk alongside, like Pope Francis says, to smell like the sheep, and to offer them the love and support that they need until they can align their mind with their body, which is the way that we treat every other dysphoria, from anorexia and bulimia to body dysmorphia. Gender ideology is the only one where someone is encouraged by a psychologist and a doctor to align their body with their mind rather than the other way around. And then for all those kids who are taken in by TikTok and Instagram and other videos that tells them that they'll be more popular and more authentically themselves and they'll have more friends if they would make this transition, they need to understand that God created them as an embodied soul, that their body expresses something about who they are. As Pope Francis beautifully teaches, that when we deny our sexuality, that we breach the two great commandments. We first breach our relationship with God because we reject the gift of our body. We also breach the relationship with other people. We can't love our neighbor if we're not authentically who God made us to be, but instead project something else. And then, of course, just the lifelong of medical pain and hardship and expense that comes with a permanent transition, because once you go down that road, the medical bills never stop.
Questions before we take a break in about 2.5 minutes. But A, were you surprised that this was a concern for so many people who really would not vote for a Republican or somebody even slightly right of center? So many people, looking at not only surveys, even though we know that the economy and immigration were at the top of the list, common sense and this whole idea of pushing this down people's throats was a big issue for a lot of people, and that's why they decided to vote the way they did. That's number one. And number two, what do you think could have happened in a worst-case scenario had the election gone the other way? And if you can't answer both questions, if you hear the music, it's like musical chairs. Stop, and we'll pick it up on the other side of the break. But let's look at the voters. Were you surprised by that, by many voters speaking up about this?
Well, I was initially, but as I saw the Trump campaigns continue commercials on this issue, it was clear that they were seeing movements in the polls as a result of their focus. And if you look at the recent New York Times poll just days ago, it shows that 79% of Americans oppose males in women's sports, and 71% that children should be protected from, not encouraged to use dangerous drugs and surgery to change their bodies. And so there was this underlying current of support for these very kinds of policies. Now, if the Biden administration had stayed in place, I'm sure that we would have seen even more robust regulations demanding that boys who identify as girls be included in women's sports. You would have seen increased pressure for insurance plans to cover these expensive and dangerous procedures. And they would have continued to redefine the very nature of sex in every nook and cranny of federal law. We were on an incredibly steep downward slope, and we're moving down it very quickly. And this is a total 180-degree reversal.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this up next in the break. And great job in answering those two questions in such a limited amount of time. But we'll talk about the impact on free speech and religious freedom when we come back, because it's all connected. More with John Bursch, attorney and author of Loving God's Children, the Church and Gender Ideology, from our friends at Sophia. And also, of course, he's with the wonderful organization, the Advocacy Organization for Faith Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. We'll be right back. More with John coming up.
Does unity in the church eliminate diversity? No, says the Catholic Catechism. From the beginning, the Catholic Church has been marked by great diversity. Diversity in God's gifts. Diversity in the multiplicity of cultures and people who are its members. There is even diversity in its particular churches who maintain their own traditions. The Catechism asserts this is not a threat to the Church's unity. Sin, however, and its consequences are a constant threat to unity. The number one bond of unity is charity, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. There are also visible bonds of unity: profession of one faith, common celebration of divine worship, especially the sacraments and apostolic succession through the sacrament of holy orders. This is Peggy Stanton, and this has been the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popcak.
Sharing meals as a family isn't just about nourishing our bodies. It's about nourishing our spirits and relationships, too. A large body of research points to the many ways that family meals boost the well-being of kids and parents alike. It can be tough for families to consistently make time to sit down and eat together, but when we do, it's like we're saying to one another, spending time with you is one of the most important parts of my day. In a way, the table that our family gathers around starts to look a little like the altar at church. It becomes a place for practicing gratitude, experiencing sharing, and building communion. To discover more ways your family can celebrate the liturgy of domestic church life, visit CatholicHOM.com. I'm Dr. Greg Popcak, but you can call me Family Man. And hey, could you pass the peas? Thanks.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
We have a son that's still struggling in his faith. I find such encouragement in how to pray to saints, especially St. Monica, how not to give up, how to just love him unconditionally. I find that encouragement through the Catholic radio because others call with that same concern.
You're listening to the best of Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo.
28 minutes past the hour. Thanks for tuning in to EWTN. Continue our conversation on the fallout, positive fallout, and some of the issues we still have to deal with as Catholics with the new administration that we'll be watching closely with expert John Bursch. He's the author of a beautiful book, Loving God's Children, the Church and Gender Ideology. He also, as we mentioned, serves as VP, Vice President of Appellate Advocacy for Alliance Defending Freedom. If you're not familiar with ADF, you should really check out their amazing work. They're the largest public interest law firm in the entire world, defending, praise God, religious liberty, free speech, parental rights, marriage and family, and the right to life. He has argued 12 cases in the High Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, including cases defending the Catholic Church's teaching on marriage and sexuality. He speaks frequently around the country in both religious and secular settings, and he talks about marriage, human sexuality, the right to life. He is also a fourth-degree Knight of Columbus, a three-time past president of the Grand Rapids, Michigan Legatus chapter and a member of the Pro-Life Partners Foundation Advisory Board. The thoughts expressed in his book do not purport to reflect those of ADF or its clients, but this is an excellent resource for you folks, especially with everything that's going on right now. And again, John is the author of the book, Loving God's Children, the Church and Gender Ideology. Now, we were chatting during the break. What's interesting in this whole executive order, if you read it, it's very easy to find online. You can go to the White House. It's available there. We'll also put a link to it on our archive section. And the executive order under the presidential actions, defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth to the federal government. This is the other thing we were talking about during the break, John, how important it is for us to connect the dots and pull out and look at the big picture, because this from the White House impacts so much, including the issue which we're going to get into now of free speech, which is actually mentioned in this executive order, correct?
It is, and it's critically important because for far too long, Catholics have not only felt the oppression of the Biden administration's policies on gender ideology, but they've been afraid to even speak out publicly because of fear that they might lose their job. And the executive order in Section 5, entitled Protecting Rights, and it asks the Attorney General to issue guidance to ensure that we have the freedom to talk about these issues. It says to express the binary nature of sex and the right to single-sex spaces in workplaces and federally funded entities covered by the Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act covers nearly every employer in the United States. So if you're working for a public entity or a private entity, the Trump White House is saying to you, the Attorney General is going to have your back if you want to say that there is no such thing as a boy born in a girl's body or vice versa. As a matter of science, we know that, and as a matter of faith, we know that, because God doesn't make mistakes. And so this is going to free up everyone to be able to talk about these important issues, and that will hopefully start to turn the cultural tide on this and bring people back to the truth, capital T.
We've already seen some change from large firms such as Ford Motor Company and others, and even the University of Michigan right in our own backyard here in the Great Lakes state, changing on some of these DEI policies, which also impacted free speech.
Yeah, the DEI policies have been a disaster for free speech. What it says is that if you're in a workplace and you want to express the Catholic Church's truth about God's plan for marriage or about the human body, that you're prohibited from doing that because that makes other people feel bad. And we've seen a remarkable reversal since the election, even leading up into the inauguration, where big companies are pulling back on DEI. And that includes public universities, too. This had been such an ensconced policy for so many of those institutions. It's almost miraculous to see the way those things have changed, because that wasn't the product of any election. It was the product of a cultural groundswell against the DEI movement to make changes, and we're starting to see those.
In terms of, let's move to another area of free speech. We saw so much, pressure on people, whether it be with COVID, whether it be with parents speaking up at schools. Remember, gosh, it wasn't too long ago that some parents were actually arrested at school board meetings and they were jailed for being terrorists, American terrorists. How is that being impacted positively, do you think, with this new administration? What have you seen so far? I know it's early, but he did a lot of things yesterday, and there's also been movement prior to the inauguration, but right after the election, where people, I think, feeling a lot more comfortable to speak freely.
Yeah, in addition to people getting arrested at school board meetings, government officials were calling up social media platforms under the Biden administration, like Facebook and others, and as we heard from Zuckerberg recently, screaming and yelling at their employees to take off what the administration considered disinformation about COVID, which, by the way, almost always turned out to be true in the end about whether it was, where COVID was originating, the efficacy of masks and medicines and so on and so forth. And so in addition to the gender ideology executive order, President Trump also signed a free speech executive order yesterday. It's called Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship. And it starts right off in the very first sentence, its purpose: the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, an amendment essential to the success of our republic, enshrines the right of the American people to speak freely in the public square without government interference. And then it talks about how in the previous administration, officials trampled on that free speech right under the guise of combating misinformation, disinformation, malinformation by coercing social media companies and others to restrict speech. And so it declares a policy of the United States to secure the right of the American people to engage in constitutionally protected speech and ensure that no federal government employee or agency ever facilitates any conduct that would unconstitutionally abridge the free speech of any American citizen. As dramatic as the gender ideology executive order is in that space, this executive order is equally dramatic, a 180-degree turn in the free speech space.
Well, John, before we let you go, I want to talk about the issue of life, because we know that there are some issues that we disagree with regarding this administration, especially Trump's support for the abortion pill, also for IVF and some other troubling things. So how do we deal with that? Because it's very much a mixed bag. For example, he's moved away from the World Health Organization. That came out yesterday. That's a huge step because of all the funding and the connection they have to abortion. But what do we do, and is there opportunity for us to sit down with him and talk about this, do you think?
Well, I certainly hope so, because he's had such good communication with the pro-life community in the past, going all the way back to his very first election. And with his appointment of the justices and other things, he had the most pro-life presidency the first time around in the history of the United States. But, it's a good example of why, as Catholics, we don't put our hope in political parties or any one particular politician. We only put our hope in God, because inevitably we'll be disappointed about some things. And so this is one where we have some work to do. And I think what Dobbs demonstrated for all of us is that after a 49-and-a-half-year culture of death, 63 million unborn children killed in the womb, that we do have a lot of work to transform our cultural mindset when it comes to this. Those percentages that we talked about of people who oppose boys and girls sports or oppose dangerous drugs for kids, we need those same kinds of percentages for people to support the notion that an unborn child has the same dignity and value and worth as someone who's already been born, and that they're worthy of respect and protection. Issues like IVF and other things are opportunities for us to educate our families, our neighbors, our friends, our co-employees, and ultimately our political officials. And we'll have to continue working toward the day when abortion in the United States is not only just illegal, but unthinkable.
John, thanks so much for hanging with us of so many issues. We'll be right back on Catholic Connection. Stay tuned.
Living the Beatitudes with Father Bjorn.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Saint Josemaria Escriva says that we are called to light up the pathways of this earth by being sowers of peace and joy. This comes from being aware that we are sons and daughters of God. On the road of life, though, we find dangers, but God walks with us every step of our life, pouring out the gifts of His Holy Spirit upon us. Our Lady is our companion, like GPS in our car, connected to the cloud and bringing the latest updates to help us navigate our journey and get out of traffic on the way to the eternal kingdom. We don't want to get into family fights on our way to God's vacation destination, but we should be these sowers of peace and joy. We shouldn't accept substitutes, accept only the authentic identity of being His children, His sons and daughters. Let's grow in happiness and bring peace to those around us. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.
For more about the Beatitudes, visit EWTNRC.com.
Dr. Ray Guarendi.
He's not on drugs. Parents will come into my office and describe a litany of trouble about this long. Then they'll say this: I'm giving you the wrong impression. Overall, he's a pretty good kid. How so? Well, he's not on drugs or anything like that. One of the new moral high bars out there, he's not on drugs. You want to raise a child not with the absence of pathology, but with the presence of virtue. She's miserable with me, but she treats everybody else great. Again, not the absence of bad behavior, but the presence of good behavior. He's not on drugs? It's a rationale. May provide some comfort. It's not a path to virtue.
You're listening to the best of Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo.
Welcome back, Catholic Connection. And what an honor to interview pro-lifers who have been through so much to support those who can't speak for themselves, including our guest this morning. And thanks to my friend, Dr. Monica Miller, for lining this up. And, of course, my wonderful producer, Andrew Will Goodman. And he is one of the pardoned pro-lifer, pardoned by Donald Trump, and Monica has put us in touch with him. So, Will, I was telling you during the break that I was, and also in preparation for our interview this morning, and thanks for joining us, just doing a search online. I'm sure you're well aware of this as someone active in the pro-life movement. If you look up the story about pro-lifers pardoned by Donald Trump, it's so interesting to see the way the media play it in terms of they make you sound like if you're following a secular outlet, like you're this hardened criminal who burned up buildings or something versus what actually happened. So it's frustrating to me the way the story is being played. Not surprising, but that's why we wanted you on the air this morning to get the truth out there. First of all, thank you for all you do. So share with us where you were when you heard the news about the pardon.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's a joy to be on your show and a real honor. I was actually in the Danbury Federal Prison in Danbury, Connecticut, on the day of the pardon, and I was in a cell block, Bravo cell block, and there's 3 stories of cells, and I was in my cell on the bottom bunk writing a letter, and it's pretty noisy in there, but I heard one of the guys from the 3rd floor yell, "Goodman," with my last name, and I thought it was they were calling me, and then I heard it again. They said, "Goodman, get up here. The president's pardoning you." So there's a TV room that's on the 3rd floor there. It's a day room, and I tried to get up there as quick as I could, given my concussion. But I got up there in time to see on Fox News, it said President Trump signing second wave of executive pardons, just pardoning the pro-lifers. And I was overjoyed. It was incredible. Guys were giving me high five, shaking my hands. And, yeah, it was unbelievable.
So take us back, tell us your story. Give us the background of what happened that led you to be jailed for this.
Live Action, a pro-life organization, did a sting operation at a late-term abortion facility in Washington, D.C. And at this facility, they do abortions through 9 months, and there's reason to believe, based on Live Action, that there are what are called live birth abortions. And so a group of us rescuers chose to go to this place to share Christ's love, to share Jesus' love with the mothers, the fathers, the babies, and also the abortion staff. We go in peace to promote peace, and on this particular day we had 10 rescuers, most of whom were grandmothers and grandfathers, and as they entered the waiting room to pray, they were attacked by the abortion staff, and the staff was quite brutal, injuring 2 of the elderly ladies, and but they sat down in the chairs, prayed the rosary, prayed. I was outside in a hallway. So this abortion facility is in an office building in D.C., so it's like on the 3rd floor, and I was in the hallway handing out brochures to help the mothers, pregnancy resource information, and to let them know that a mother had died at this place, a woman died, and that there are many malpractice suits. So I wanted to, let them know we care about their health and that there are places they can go for free medical care and free housing. And so while we were there, we saw a number of women who were visibly pregnant in the later stages of their pregnancy, and sadly, the staff called the police on us. We tried to plead with the police to protect the babies, and we continued to pray. And then at a certain point, the FBI arrived, and were taking pictures and everything. So we were there praying for about 2 hours, and it was very peaceful in our prayers and our outreach to the people who were coming there. But then at a certain point, the police said, "You need to leave." And my response to them in the hall is that we'd like to leave, but only on the condition that our brothers and sisters won't be harmed. And when we said that the abortion center would close, and at that point, they said, "That's not possible." And I said, "I'm just going to get down on my knees and pray." And once I got on my knees, they put the handcuffs on me, put me in a wheelchair, and wheeled me out.
And so then what happened in terms of your sentence?
This was in October of 2020, and we were released. After an FBI interrogation, we were released, and we didn't hear anything for practically 2 years. And then, I think it was in May, my phone just started blowing up in the morning. I was getting texts, I was getting calls, and I'm like, wow, something's really going on. And it was early, and I was getting news that all of the rescuers were getting their homes raided by the FBI. In some cases, the doors were being kicked down by agents wearing full body armor with brandishing their weapons. And this was now under the Biden regime. So this was the tail end of Trump's presidency when we did the rescue. But now fast forward to 2 years, an indictment had come down, and the Department of Justice said that we were involved in violent crimes violating the freedom of access to clinic entrance, and a very draconian conspiracy against rights, a federal felony charge that carried with it up to 10 years in prison. So this was all very shocking. It was unprecedented in the history of the pro-life movement, and I think even in the history of American protest, for peaceful protest. But it was really chilling to see how the federal government was going against my friends. You know, these loving people. Some are secular Franciscans, grandparents, people who've dedicated their lives to helping moms and babies, getting their doors kicked in, and it was just shocking. I was actually staying in New York doing pro-life work at the time with a 90-year-old World War II veteran, a great Catholic guy, Harry, and I said, you know, the FBI are arresting our friends who were involved in a rescue, and he said, boy, you know, we fought in WW2 to protect women and children, and now they're arresting you for protecting women and children. He just shook his head and said, this isn't my country. What has happened to our country? Mm-hmm. And so yeah, then we ended up going to court in the summer of 2023, and it was really a show trial. We had a pro-abortion judge, very pro-abortion jury, pro-abortion prosecutors with the Department of Justice, and after about 2 weeks of a trial, we were convicted of the felonies, and the judge said, well, my hands are tied. We have to take you into custody right away because these are designated as violent crimes. So we thought we'd be returning to court in a couple of months for sentencing, but instead all of us were taken in shackles, taken from the courtroom, the federal courthouse in D.C., and then brought to the jail over in Alexandria.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. I can remember your story because we followed it here, but I wanted to remind folks in case they weren't familiar with your particular case. But this is what is so ridiculous and so hypocritical, such a double standard, because you are dragged away in handcuffs. You said show trial. That's a very good description. This was meant to, and you know this was meant to send a message. If you're pro-life and you're trying to support women who want to or who are going in for an abortion, and they say want to have an abortion, and we know that most women who go to abortions are pressured to have one anyway. It's a whole other story.
Right.
But if you sit there and you try to protect them, or in any way, shape, or form show up outside an abortion mill doing anything, whether it's peaceful prayer, it doesn't matter, you're done. And this was a show trial. This was an example. We're going to make an example out of you to keep other people away from sidewalk counseling and from the pro-life. That's my personal opinion. Will, more with you when we come back. Thank you for sharing your story. And Will Goodman is with us. He is one of those pardoned pro-lifers under the Trump administration. We'll be right back. More of his story and more of the double standards that are out there. If we think about what happened with the protests last summer, the pro-Palestinian protests, not to mention the so-called Summer of Love in Seattle, the situation in Minneapolis, and on and on and on. That was a movement, but these people are criminals. Yeah, right. We'll be right back.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Italy aficionado Teresa Tomio's newest book is now out on the Ave Maria online store. In Italy's Shrines and Wonders, Teresa Tomio provides how best to navigate the most popular sites, best routes, and how to best to soak in all the beauty Italy has to offer. She also shares the most inspiring journeys to make your Italy excursion utterly unforgettable. Italy's Shrines and Wonders from Catholic Connections Teresa Tomio can be purchased at AveMariaRadio.net.
People ask how they can care for older family members who can't fully care for themselves. One answer is Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care. Visiting Angels assists adults nationwide with 600 locations to continue living at home and not have to move into a nursing home. Their caregivers provide assistance in hygiene, meals, and light housework. Services are provided up to 24 hours per day, and you can select your caregiver before service begins. More information, including franchise opportunities, is on the web at visitingangels.com.
You're listening to the best of Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo.
So appreciate the witness of these brave pro-lifers, including Will Goodman, our guest for this morning, among those pardoned by President Donald Trump recently. Will, we were talking during the break about this double standard that's out there, and you're very familiar with the history of nonviolent protests in the United States of America, which is part of who we are. I mean, we look at the civil rights movement, we look at the Vietnam conflict, and then you have the situations over the last few years, for example, that were just celebrated, accepted, and really ignored or uplifted, or both, by the leftist legacy media. So many different cases of a double standard where violence is embraced, as Kamala Harris said when she was running for president. It's a movement. And yet you're doing peaceful response to abortion, trying to help women and children, and you get arrested and treated as a common and critical. This is the thing that people need to know. This is the problem here.
Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, at the sentencing, had the opportunity to kind of run through a little bit of this with the judge, that our commitment is to nonviolent direct action, peaceful, nonviolent witnesses for life, and that this is a patriotic tradition in our democratic republic. We have things kicking off with the Boston Tea Party. No taxation without representation. We move forward to the abolitionist movement, which was really driven by Christian ideals and the understanding of human dignity. And even though it was breaking the law, the Underground Railroad was rescuing people who were being terribly mistreated. And then you can look at the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement and peace movement. We've got some beautiful examples of people like Rosa Parks and others. And in our nation's capital, we have this beautiful memorial to the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King Jr. And for the rescue movement in the United States, the pro-life movement, it's always derived its spirituality from our Christian faith, from our Catholic faith. So in Proverbs 24, it says, rescue those being taken to death, intervene for those who are being taken to slaughter. And so Catholics who were involved in both the peace movement doing sit-ins and also in the civil rights movements doing sit-ins at soup counters, they incorporated the same nonviolent approach to say, if we can sit in a lunch counter to show the dignity of human life for all people, regardless of race, sitting inside an abortion waiting room or in front of the door peacefully to show the dignity of the human person in the womb. And so when we were in Washington, D.C., just to be clear, in our case of the rescue, we had people praying on the outside, sidewalk counseling on the sidewalk outside the office building. These individuals were in no way harassed by the police, but our group was trying to rescue. And so our intervention was, praying in the waiting room. Rescue tries to provide, to interpose, to lay down your life for love of your friend, to give a witness peacefully by just kneeling down, say, in front of the abortion door and say, please do not take my brothers and sisters. I was counseling in the hallway, but I was also waiting by the staff door for when the abortionist, Cesar St. Angelo, came in, and I was going to plead with him on behalf of the mothers and children, say, please don't use violence. And if he wasn't going to listen, I was just going to kneel down in front of the door, knowing that he would walk right by me, and I'm not going to oppose him, but to provide this last-minute witness, a peaceful witness, and share with the listeners something that Archbishop Neumann said at the Vigil Mass for Life before the March for Life this year at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. And he said to the young people there and to everyone in the pro-life movement, he said, if we're going to follow Jesus, we have to follow him all the way to Calvary. We have to be prepared to take up the cross to transform our culture. And so the pro-life movement, the rescue movement, we're trying to do this, to try to follow Jesus. He's the divine rescuer. We follow him into the rescue. And different people are called to different things, to sidewalk counseling, maternity homes, pregnancy resource centers, post-abortion ministry. But some are called to rescue and to do these peaceful sit-ins, to be a voice for the voiceless. And so we follow Jesus, and if unjust suffering comes our way, we just unite it to the holy sacrifice of the Mass, unite it to the suffering of our preborn brothers and sisters, and we just pray for conversion of hearts.
What are you doing now that you're out of prison, obviously still in the pro-life movement, and thanks be to God for your witness, but what's on your agenda? And I'm really hoping that this is an opportunity for us to lovingly educate people, as you did so eloquently, in terms of the history of the peaceful protests and what's happened in our country, and the double standard and the injustice and what happened to you and other pro-lifers, to explain to people the reality of the situation versus, as we started this interview earlier, how the media portray this so incorrectly and in such a biased way. The education is huge because so many people are formed not by the church but by the culture.
And I think two concrete things we can do is really work for a total abolition of abortion from the natural beginning to the natural end of life. It'll be challenging, it'll be difficult, but it provides us an opportunity to educate on the value of life from that first moment of conception, God's plan for life, His love for these children. And then the second part of it is we can defund Planned Parenthood. We can take these hundreds of millions of dollars and give them to the crisis pregnancy centers, to the maternity homes, to the church groups, to the Project Rachel and other organizations that are building a culture of life. It's solidarity with the child through abolition and solidarity with the mother and father through providing the needs that need to be met. It's a challenging thing to be pregnant with an unplanned pregnancy, maybe have financial trouble. Mm-hmm. As the church, we go and we will address the problems. We will be with them, accompany them.
My only concern, I want to defund Planned Parenthood, but my only concern is I don't want the federal money connected, this is my personal opinion, to these pro-life organizations because it can be quickly taken away depending on who gets in office, and then it could turn against us. So I want to defund Planned Parenthood. We shouldn't be giving that money to them because they already make $1 gazillion, absolutely, and they're the number one abortion provider. But I think working on our own and really getting the community in terms of education could help. But that's a whole other story. We can come back and talk about that. But great points, Will. Thank you. God bless you. We're glad you're out there making a difference.
You've been listening to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo. Catholic Connection is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Our producer is Andrew Kruchek. For copies of this program or for more information, visit AveMariaRadio.net. That's AVEMariaRadio.net. Thanks for listening and join us next time for another edition of Catholic Connection.